Hey everybody, quick video on something that has come up a couple times. So, session notes. I know some of the new folks that are just learning session notes are dealing with this right now, and it can be tough to figure out what should be included, what doesn't need to be included, how much detail to go into, how long these things should be. I mean, really, at this point, it's probably enough of a struggle just to figure out when to stop the session and start the actual notes. But when you get to that point, here are some things to keep in mind. First of all, session notes matter to us for a few reasons. They are the only official record of the consultation that will exist. So, whatever happens in that meeting and is documented in those session notes is really all we have to go on about that consultation. So, for example, if a student they come in and they go from us to class, give the presentation, and let's say, for example, their professor marks them down for something they said or did, and then the student says that the speech lab told them to say or do that. And then, this has happened before, the professor calls the speech lab and asks about it. Well, this is the record that I would then pull up to decide, if there was something inappropriate or, wrong that needs to be retrained. So don't forget about this being valuable to us. Not only that, but it is a student preparation tool, meaning when you write down in there what was covered and what's coming up next, that will often serve as the only reminder the student has about what was discussed in the session. I mean, let's face it, the way this often happens is students will come in, they work, they get some pretty good feedback, and then they don't think about it again for another week or so. And then they try to pull it all out in one night and put it all together. And, that's hard enough to do, but when you can't remember what happened and what that advice was, the only way to go back and find it is to check their email and look at the session notes. Realize that also these are very public facing. While we ask for permission from clients to send these out, often professors get these, as you know, and that's really the way that these folks judge us as a speech lab. If we are competent, if we're doing a good job or not. And, we want to make sure that we are. And so that should be reflected in those session notes. Now, the last item here, grades, just remember, don't talk about grades or enter anything in the session notes about grades. And the last thing I'll say before we get to some specific examples is don't forget that we don't use pronouns other than they and their and them in the session notes. Like the student is the way to go, or the client, or something along those lines. Now, when you get into your session notes in Book It, don't forget to fill the whole thing out. And in that first drop down box there, right under, you see Victor's name there. Spoiler alert, if you didn't know, Royal is Victor. But you drop down general session and you should see a full list of classes that the client has. And so, that's where they would put in, or you would put in, what class this was for if it's not already lit up. It's going to be speech, and then what project did they work on today? Is it informative speech, persuasive speech, impromptu speaking, organizing, outlining, whatever. And then from there, you can get a little more specific with the check boxes. Not everything that you do will be in those check boxes. Just this past week, or really the past couple of weeks when I've been back doing some consulting, I've found many times that what we covered wasn't represented well. And that's what's happening with the next box. Not only is that for you to put in some very vital information, but if there's something that was covered or worked on or dealt with that's not in those check boxes, enter that in that important to remember box. Beyond that, that's where you're going to put what was covered. And of course, the plans going forward are what the student thinks that should happen next. For us, let's focus for just a minute on that what is important to remember. Here are some examples of good and bad session notes. So, the first one you see there, the client came in wanting to create. Now, there's nothing terrible about saying that. It's just not super professional. I think you could just take out the wanting to, or in the word wanting, right? The client came in to create an outline or whatever comes next. Similar to this sort of useless language of wanting to, is this idea that the client ran through or they wanted to run through their presentation. Don't use those words either. When professors often hear that someone ran through something. That's code for half-ass practice. They just sort of ran through it. They didn't rehearse it. And so change those words to reflect more accurately what was done. I mean, unless the client comes in and you tell them, hey, read through your speech as fast as you can, they didn't run through it. So they rehearsed it, they practiced it. Those sorts of terms are much more accurate, and accuracy is important. Again, thinking how these go to the professor. Here's some more. So the client and I forming an outline for their informative speech, and what is that? Like, that's all that's on the screen, but just look at that top box there. I mean, there's obvious problems with the I not being capitalized, but the client and I forming an outline for their persuasive speech, and it's just not accurate. It's not proper, and you don't have to be, like you're publishing a paper with your session notes. But again, we get judged on these notes, and that's the reason that you don't just write them and then send them to the professors. That's why they go through Victor, so that there can be another set of eyes on them to make sure that they're good before they go out. The next box there, make the speech less persuasive. We even came up with a new main point to avoid that issue. We then discussed the attention getter, and the client came up with a way to make an ending that ensures the audience will the speech has ended. The client and I discussed relevance, and they came up with 2 reasons the audience should care about the topic. Okay, so let's focus on the first full sentence there. We then discussed the attention getter, and the client came up with a way to make an ending that ensures the audience will the speech has ended. So obviously there's a word missing, right? They will know the speech has ended. But that came up with an idea about their ending, or even in the line before that, came up with a new main point. What was it, right? Go ahead and don't keep it a secret. Tell us, like, what was the new main point, and how did that avoid the issue? Or what was the new ending that assures the audience will know the speech is finished? Now, you don't have to put the student plans to tell a story. That story is, and then write out the whole thing. But instead, you could come up with something like, the client came up with a way to make the ending clearer, and they plan to tell or complete a story so that the audience will see that the end has arrived, or something, right? So you're just being a little more precise, a little more detailed than what you see here. The next one up, kind of on that same note, take one more step. We created an outline and worked on the main points. Good. But what did you work on about them? Did you create them? Did you revise them? Did you add to them? Did you further develop? Be a little more specific on that. And then the client plans on fixing their outline to make the necessary changes. Unless the next box, where you've got things that are going to happen for the student afterwards, what they should do, and if that next box says things like change the following items, that's fine to leave it this way. But if that's not there, then we need more information. What are they going to fix? What are these necessary changes? How are they going to fix it? Are they going to replace it? Are they going to revamp it? And again, the idea here is I just want you to think one step further than what you see on the screen. All right, here are some good ones. This is the last slide for us. The client plans to complete their outline before it's due tomorrow and starting to practice out loud. So there's obviously that should say start to practice out loud. But we've got sort of a little bit of a time stamp here. They're going to do this before it's due tomorrow and then start practicing out loud. The next one, the student practiced their speech 3 times through, nice and specific. They focused on maintaining eye contact, keeping a steady rate, and continuing to effectively use gestures. Again, they could simply say they practiced their speech 3 times effectively. What does effectively mean? Oh, maintaining eye contact, steady rate, effectively using gestures. The student also finished creating a speaking outline, and we finally went over how to properly cite a tweet. That's super specific, but important. It's good. The last one, the client came in with an outline for their speech. We went over each step of an introduction and conclusion and made sure all the elements were present. We developed transitions for part of their speech, and we also discussed a closure statement for the conclusion. The client received a hard copy of the introduction and conclusion guide sheet. So again, here you see at the very end, what we like to do whenever possible is attach a guide sheet to these notes, and you can do that through posting or pasting a link from our website. And so this one was an in-person visit, and the client or the consultant apparently just went out, got a guide sheet, and handed it to them. I like that it's in here, though. It still states that it was given to the client. But again, the client could always say they lost it. But if they have a link in there, not so much. But yeah, so with the rest of this example, we've got each step of the introduction and conclusion. We checked all elements were present, developed transitions. I mean, it's clearer, it's more useful for not only us, the professor, but also the student too. So that's what I wanted to share with you about session notes, especially as you're moving closer and closer to doing your own. And for the folks watching who are already well trained, there's no harm in sort of this refresher on session notes. So keep that in mind as you make yours. And of course, if you have a question about any of your session notes, if they're correct or not, you could always put them in and then save them and then shoot a text over to Victor and say, hey, when you check my session notes, let me know if anything needed to change. Because, I can tell you some examples and ideas, but sometimes it's best if you see what you typed out and then what a sort of revised or more maybe appropriate version of those same notes might look like. So that is the idea for this week. Think about your session notes. Make sure that they are complete and thorough. But again, you're not writing a novel, so find the balance like most things in life, and I bet you'll be good. All right. Have a wonderful day.